25 experts stood in that mansion that night, and somehow the only person who knew how to save the mafia boss's son was the maid nobody bothered to look at. The Moretti estate smelled like polished marble, expensive whiskey, and panic. Real panic. The kind rich people tried to hide behind calm voices in $1,000 suits. I knew the difference because I'd spent the last 11 months cleaning up after both. My name is Clara Bennett, 24 years old, maid uniform from a discount store, paycheck barely enough to cover my mom's medication and the tiny apartment we shared in Queens. At 2:17 in the morning, I was on my knees scrubbing shattered crystal from the hallway outside the East Wing while 25 specialists argued behind closed doors about why Damian Moretti's 8-year-old son still couldn't breathe properly. The mansion had never been quiet, but tonight felt different. Heavy footsteps echoed across the marble floors. Men in black suits moved quickly through the halls speaking into earpieces. A woman in a cream-colored pantsuit stormed past me holding medical files against her chest, her heels clicking sharply like a countdown clock. Nobody looked at me. They never did. To them, I was part of the furniture. Another invisible girl wiping fingerprints off glass tables, while billionaires discussed emergencies over imported scotch. But invisibility teaches you things. People reveal everything when they think you don't matter. The oxygen levels are dropping again. Someone barked from inside the room. We already adjusted the settings twice. Then why isn't it working? Another voice snapped back. I kept my head down and gathered another piece of broken glass into the dustpan. My fingers smelled faintly like lemon cleaner and bleach. The sounds inside the room blurred together with the distant thunder outside. Rain hammered against the mansion windows overlooking the Hudson River, turning the entire estate into a glowing fortress surrounded by darkness. Then I heard it. A wheezing sound. Soft. Uneven. Wrong. I froze. At first I thought it came from one of the ventilation units overhead, but then it happened again. A strained, mechanical hiss followed by silence half a second too long. My stomach tightened immediately. I'd heard that sound before. Years ago. Back when my mother still worked nights at St. Vincent's Hospital before she got sick herself. Before debt swallowed our lives whole. Before I traded nursing classes for housekeeping uniforms because somebody had to pay the bills. Move! A security guard muttered as he rushed past me carrying another silver medical case into the room. The door swung open briefly and I caught a glimpse inside. Doctors. Specialists. Monitors glowing blue. Expensive equipment crowding the walls. And standing in the center of all of it was Damian Moretti himself. Even exhausted, the man looked terrifying. 6'3" maybe. Dark tailored suit with the tie loosened at the collar. Black hair brushed back carelessly like he'd been running his hands through it for hours. But his eyes were what stopped people cold. Sharp green. Controlled. The kind of eyes that made grown men lower their voices without realizing it. He looked furious. No. Worse than furious. Afraid. You told me the best people in the country were here, Damian said quietly, and somehow that calm voice sounded more dangerous than shouting. So explain to me why my son is getting worse. Nobody answered immediately. The silence stretched tight across the room. Then another wheeze reached my ears. Longer this time. My heartbeat stumbled. Something wasn't right with the oxygen flow. I stood slowly, dustpan still in my hand, listening harder. One of the doctors adjusted something near the bed, while another checked a monitor. But nobody looked at the tank itself. Nobody noticed the small red sticker near the valve hanging upside down. My breath caught. Oh God. No way. There was no way 25 experts missed something that simple. I took one step toward the doorway before stopping myself. I was a maid. Not a doctor. Not a specialist. Just a poor girl with cleaning gloves tucked into her apron pocket, and overdue rent sitting on her kitchen counter. But inside that room, a little boy struggled to breathe while everyone important searched for complicated answers. And all I could think was that sometimes the reason people fail isn't because the problem is too big. Sometimes it's because nobody important is willing to look at the smallest thing in the room. The wheezing came again. Sharp. Hollow. Mechanical. My pulse kicked hard against my ribs as I stared through the partially open doorway. Nobody else reacted. 25 specialists surrounded that bed, and every single one of them focused on screens instead of the actual oxygen tank standing beside the wall. Increase the flow another 5%, one doctor ordered. Another disagreed immediately. We already tried that. His saturation drops every time. Then stabilize him manually. We are trying. Trying. The word sounded expensive in a room full of people billing thousands of dollars an hour. I swallowed hard and stepped closer before common sense could stop me. One of the security guards immediately blocked my path with an irritated look. Staff entrance is downstairs, he muttered. I work here, I whispered quickly. I know, which is why I am telling you to keep moving. I should have listened. I should have gone back to mopping floors and pretending I could not hear the panic leaking through the walls of that mansion. But the upside-down sticker on the oxygen valve would not leave my mind. I remembered my mother teaching me about tanks during one of her overnight shifts years ago. Green meant active. Red meant backup pressure lock. If the valve was connected incorrectly, the machine would show flow while restricting actual output. Rare mistake. Simple fix. Dangerous consequences. My stomach twisted tighter. Excuse me. I tried again, quieter this time. I think there is something wrong with the oxygen line. The guard stared at me for half a second before laughing under his breath. Not cruel exactly. Just dismissive. Like someone humoring a child. Sweetheart, there are doctors in there from Johns Hopkins and Columbia. Heat rushed into my face immediately. I hated when men called me sweetheart, like poverty automatically made me 12 years old. I know, I said softly. But I think the valve is reversed. He shook his head and turned away from me completely. Conversation over. Inside the room, another alarm sounded. The sharp electronic beeping sliced through the hallway. Everything sped up instantly. Doctors moved faster. Someone called for another respiratory specialist. A woman near the bed looked close to tears. And in the middle of all of it stood Damien Moretti, perfectly still, one hand braced against the edge of the desk beside him. Stillness looks strange on powerful men. Most rich people filled fear with noise. Damien filled it with silence. His eyes tracked every movement in the room with terrifying focus. Then his son started coughing weakly. The sound barely reached the hallway, but it cut straight through me. I saw Damien move immediately toward the bed. Not frantic. Controlled. Which somehow hurt worse to watch. Why is this happening again? He asked quietly. Nobody answered fast enough. I asked a question. The room froze under the weight of his voice. One of the doctors cleared his throat nervously. We are monitoring the situation closely. Damien stared at him for a long second. Monitoring is not the same thing as fixing it. Thunder rattled the windows behind me. Rain streaked down the glass in silver rivers while lightning briefly illuminated the hallway. The mansion suddenly felt colder. My fingers tightened around the dustpan handle. I knew I should stay quiet. People like me did not interrupt men like Damien Moretti. We cleaned around them, served coffee around them, disappeared around them. But another strained wheeze escaped from inside the room, weaker this time. My chest tightened painfully. Before I could stop myself, I spoke louder. The oxygen valve is connected wrong. Silence crashed through the hallway so fast it almost felt physical. Every head turned toward me at once. Doctors, security, assistants, all staring like they had only just realized the maid existed. One older specialist frowned immediately. What? My heartbeat slammed so hard I could hear it in my ears now. The red pressure valve, I said carefully. It is upside down. I think the backup lock engaged. The doctor blinked once before scoffing under his breath. That is impossible. Maybe it was. But Damien Moretti was no longer looking at the doctors. He was looking directly at me. And for the first time all night, the most dangerous man in New York looked at me like my words actually mattered. The older doctor looked at me like I had tracked mud across his operating room floor. You are housekeeping, he said flatly. Please do not interfere with medical procedures you clearly do not understand. My face burned so hot I thought I might actually disappear from embarrassment. Around him, several specialists exchanged tired looks, the kind people gave when they believed someone beneath them had spoken out of turn. I should have backed away. I should have apologized and returned to scrubbing floors before security escorted me out of the hallway entirely. But Damien Moretti still had not looked away from me. His green eyes stayed locked on mine with unsettling focus, sharp enough to make my pulse stumble. What exactly are you saying? He asked quietly. The room went still again. Even the doctor seemed surprised he had bothered asking me directly. I swallowed hard. The backup pressure valve is reversed, I explained carefully. If it locks, the machine can still display normal flow readings, even when the actual oxygen output drops. One of the specialists scoffed immediately. That system was installed yesterday by licensed technicians. I know, I whispered. But the red indicator is upside down. The doctor turned toward the machine with visible irritation, probably just to prove me wrong. I watched him glance down at the tank, then freeze. The smallest shift crossed his face. Confusion first, then disbelief. He crouched quickly beside the valve, adjusting the connection with both hands. Another specialist stepped closer. "Wait," she murmured under her breath. "How did we miss that?" My heartbeat thundered so loudly I barely heard the next few seconds. Someone reset the pressure line. A monitor near the bed beeped steadily. Then the oxygen saturation numbers began climbing slowly upward. 91, 93, 95. The little boy's breathing eased almost immediately. The strained wheezing disappeared into soft, steady breaths that filled the room with stunned silence. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. 25 experts stood frozen around the bed, while the machine hummed normally for the first time all night. I stared at the floor because suddenly every person in that room was looking at me. The maid. The invisible girl holding a dustpan. "That is impossible," one doctor muttered softly. "No," another corrected quietly. "It is negligence." The tension shifted instantly after that. Not panic anymore. Shame. Embarrassment. Expensive people hated looking incompetent in front of power. And Damian Moretti was power. Real power. The kind that made senators return phone calls at 3 in the morning. I felt it the second he stepped away from the bed. The room parted for him automatically. Nobody told them to move. They just did. He walked toward me slowly, each polished step echoing across the marble floors while my stomach twisted tighter with every second. Up close he looked even more intimidating somehow. Tall enough that I had to tilt my head slightly upward. Dark exhaustion shadowed beneath his eyes, but it did not weaken him. It sharpened him. Like stress only carved his edges deeper. The scent of cedarwood and rain clung faintly to his suit. I realized then that this was the first time we had ever truly looked at each other despite me cleaning this mansion for almost a year. "You noticed the valve from the hallway," he said. It was not a question. I nodded once. My mother used to work in respiratory care. My voice sounded smaller than usual under his attention. I saw the warning sticker. Another silence stretched between us. Heavy. Strange. Not uncomfortable exactly. Just intense enough to make my hands tremble slightly around the dustpan handle. Behind him, the specialists quietly resumed checking equipment while avoiding eye contact with each other. Nobody seemed eager to speak first anymore. Damian kept watching me instead, like he was trying to solve something. "What is your name?" he asked finally. I blinked once, surprised by how calm his voice had become. "Clara," I answered softly. "Clara Bennett." He repeated my name slowly like he was testing how it sounded. "Clara." Something about hearing my name in his voice made my chest tighten unexpectedly. Maybe because men like Damian Moretti usually did not memorize the names of girls who cleaned their hallways. One of the doctors approached carefully from behind him. "Mr. Moretti, your son is stabilizing now." Damian never looked away from me. "Good," he said quietly. Then after a pause that felt strangely personal he added, "Because apparently the only person in this mansion paying attention was the maid." Nobody spoke after that. Not the doctors. Not the guards. Not even the assistants carrying tablets and medical charts through the hallway. The silence inside the east wing felt almost sacred now, broken only by the soft hum of machines and the steady rain tapping against the windows overlooking the river. I lowered my eyes quickly, suddenly aware that I was still holding a dustpan in one hand, while standing in front of one of the most powerful men in New York. "I should get back to work," I murmured quietly. The words sounded ridiculous the second they left my mouth. Damian Moretti studied me for another long moment before stepping slightly aside. Not dismissing me, letting me breathe. There was a difference. "How long have you worked here?" he asked. 11 months. "And before that?" My fingers tightened around the dustpan handle again. I hated personal questions from wealthy people. They usually asked out of boredom, not care. I was in nursing school, I admitted softly. At Hunter College. Something flickered across his expression. Interest maybe. Was. I looked down at the marble floor instead of answering immediately. The polished surface reflected the chandelier lights overhead in soft gold patterns. Expensive floors. Expensive walls. Expensive silence. Everything inside the mansion reminded me exactly how far away people like Damien lived from people like me. My mother got sick, I said finally. Tuition became impossible. He nodded once. No fake sympathy. No cuerde palegi. Somehow that felt stranger. Most rich people performed concern like theater. Damien simply absorbed information quietly, like every detail mattered for reasons nobody else understood yet. Behind him, one of the specialists approached. Cautiously. Mr. Moretti, we should continue monitoring your son for the next few hours. Damien still did not look away from me. Do that, he replied calmly. The doctor hesitated. Should we call another respiratory team to double-check the equipment? Damien's jaw tightened slightly. I think 25 experts have embarrassed themselves enough for one evening. The hallway became painfully quiet again. Heat rushed into my cheeks immediately because somehow I felt responsible for that tension now. The doctor cleared his throat awkwardly before retreating without another word. I should have left then. Every instinct told me to disappear before someone blamed me for humiliating an entire team of specialists. But Damien spoke again before I could move. Did nobody ever tell you not to stay silent when you notice something wrong? The question caught me off guard. I blinked once. Most people do not like being corrected by the maid. One corner of his mouth shifted slightly. Not a smile exactly. More like he understood something unpleasant about the world and was tired of pretending otherwise. Most people are idiots, he said quietly. I nearly laughed before stopping myself. Laughing in front of Damien Moretti felt dangerous somehow. Not because he would react badly. Because the man carried so much control around him that breaking the tension even slightly felt unnatural. Then footsteps echoed sharply down the hallway. A blonde woman in a dark navy dress approached quickly holding a tablet against her chest. Late 30s maybe. Elegant. Cold-eyed. The type of woman who looked expensive without trying. Her gaze landed on me immediately with visible confusion. Damien, she said carefully. The board members are asking for updates. Her eyes shifted toward me again. Why is housekeeping standing outside the medical wing? The temperature in the hallway seemed to drop 10 degrees. I stepped back automatically. I was just leaving. No, Damien said calmly. The single word stopped me cold. The woman frowned slightly. Damien finally turned toward her. His expression unreadable again. Clara noticed the equipment malfunction before your specialists did. The woman stared at me like I had suddenly started speaking another language. She what? She saved my son's breathing line, Damien answered flatly. So perhaps everyone in this house should stop pretending they are too important to pay attention to her. My throat tightened unexpectedly at the words. Nobody had defended me like that before. Not teachers. Not employers. Definitely not powerful men in tailored suits standing beneath million-dollar chandeliers. The blonde woman looked uncomfortable now, which strangely made me more nervous instead of less. Wealthy people hated imbalance. And Damien Moretti had just shifted the entire room in my direction with one sentence. He looked back at me slowly. Clara. My name sounded different every time he said it. Heavier somehow, like he actually meant it. Do not leave the estate tonight. My pulse stumbled instantly. What? The storm is getting worse, he replied calmly. And after tonight, I would prefer keeping the only observant person in this mansion somewhere safe. Safe. The word stayed in my head long after Damien Moretti walked away toward his son's room. Nobody had called me safe in years. Usually people use words like late, poor, exhausted, behind on rent. Safe belonged to other women. Women with trust funds and husbands who wore watches worth more than my yearly paycheck. Not girls from Queens taking the subway home after midnight shifts with pepper spray hidden in their coat pockets. The blonde woman remained standing beside me after Damien disappeared into the medical suite. Up close, her perfume smelled expensive and sharp, like winter roses. I am Evelyn, she said finally. I oversee household operations here. Household operations. Rich people had elegant names for everything. You mean the staff? I answered quietly before I could stop myself. Her eyes narrowed just slightly, though not enough to look offended. More surprised. You are not what I expected. I almost laughed at that. Nobody ever expected much from maids. Neither are you, I replied softly. For one dangerous second I thought I had crossed a line. Then something strange happened. Evelyn smiled. Small, brief, but real. Interesting, she murmured under her breath. She glanced toward the medical wing where specialists still moved carefully around the room. Their voices had lowered now. Less arrogance. More caution. You embarrassed several important people tonight, Clara. My stomach tightened immediately. I did not mean to. That is why it worked. She studied me for another moment before handing me a folded towel from a nearby table. Only then did I realize my hands were still damp from cleaning solution and rainwater. The storm knocked out several roads near the bridge, Evelyn continued calmly. You will stay in the East guest quarters tonight. I cannot, I said immediately. My mother is home alone. A driver can take medicine or supplies to her if needed. I blinked in surprise. You would do that? Evelyn's expression turned unreadable again. Mr. Moretti would. The answer unsettled me more than it should have. Men like Damien Moretti did not notice women like me unless they needed something. That was how the world worked. But tonight felt different somehow. Wrong in a way I could not explain. Like the axis of the entire mansion had shifted slightly after he looked at me in that hallway. Evelyn led me down the long marble corridor while thunder rolled outside the windows. The estate looked almost unreal this late at night. Gold lighting reflected across polished floors. Giant oil paintings stared down from dark walls. Fresh lilies filled crystal vases large enough to cover my monthly rent. Somewhere downstairs, a piano played softly through hidden speakers. Classical music drifting through a mansion full of armed security and exhausted specialists. Nothing about the Moretti estate made sense once you looked too closely. Does his son usually get sick like this? I asked quietly before I could stop myself. Evelyn's heels slowed slightly against the marble. Leon has respiratory complications, she answered carefully. Since the accident 3 years ago. Something in her tone warned me not to ask more questions. So I stayed quiet. We reached the guest wing a minute later. The room Evelyn opened looked larger than my entire apartment back in Queens. Cream-colored walls. Fireplace. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the river. A bed so large it looked untouched by human problems. I stopped in the doorway, genuinely speechless. This is for me? Evelyn nodded once. Fresh clothes are in the closet. Someone will bring dinner shortly. I do not need all this. That is not your decision. There it was again. That strange Moretti world logic where kindness sounded almost like an order. Evelyn turned to leave, then paused at the doorway. One piece of advice, Clara. What? Her expression softened just slightly. Do not underestimate what it means that Damien noticed you tonight. The door closed quietly behind her before I could answer. I stood alone in the massive room listening to rain strike the windows while my pulse refused to settle. Downstairs somewhere beneath this enormous mansion, the most powerful man I had ever met sat beside his son's bed. And for reasons I still did not understand, he had looked at me like I mattered. I barely slept. The bed was too soft, the room too quiet, and my mind would not stop replaying the way Damien Moretti had looked at me in that hallway. Not politely, not casually, intently, like I had become a question he needed answered. Around 4 in the morning, I finally gave up pretending sleep would come and wandered toward the giant windows overlooking the river. Rain still fell across the city in silver sheets, blurring Manhattan's skyline into glowing shapes of gold and white. Somewhere far below, headlights moved slowly along the roads like drifting stars. I wrapped my arms around myself and tried not to think about overdue bills sitting on my kitchen counter back home. Tried not to think about how quickly one strange night could make ordinary life feel far away. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. Before I could answer, the door opened slightly and an older woman stepped inside carrying a silver tray. Tea steamed gently beside fresh fruit and pastries that probably cost more than my weekly grocery budget. Good morning, she said kindly. Mr. Moretti requested breakfast be brought up. Requested, not ordered. That detail felt strangely important. You can just leave it there, I said softly. The woman smiled while placing the tray near the fireplace. The staff has been talking about you all night. My stomach dropped immediately. That sounds terrible. Her smile widened slightly. Actually, no. Most people here have worked for the Moretti family a long time. We are not used to seeing Damien impressed. I looked away quickly, pretending interest in the rain outside. I think he was just relieved his son is okay. Perhaps. Her tone suggested otherwise. After she left, I sat beside the untouched breakfast tray listening to thunder fade slowly into distant rain. The mansion felt calmer now. Less panic. More exhaustion. But underneath it all, tension still lingered in the walls somehow. Like everyone inside the estate was waiting for something. Around 7:30, I finally changed into the fresh clothes left in the closet. Soft gray sweater. Dark jeans. Everything expensive without trying too hard. I hated how comfortable the fabric felt against my skin. Wealth had a way of making ordinary life seem rougher afterward. I had just finished tying my hair back when another knock came at the door. This time it was Evelyn. Leon is awake, she said immediately. Relief rushed through me before I could hide it. That is good. Evelyn studied my face carefully. He asked to meet you. My heartbeat stumbled. Me. Apparently he remembers hearing your voice in the hallway. I stared at her for a second. I did not even go near him. Children notice more than adults think. That sounded painfully true. 5 minutes later, Evelyn led me downstairs through quieter sections of the mansion I had never seen before. Morning light filtered through enormous windows now, turning the marble floors pale gold instead of silver. Staff members moved through the halls carrying fresh flowers and coffee trays. Several stared openly when I passed. One younger maid nearly dropped a stack of folded linens after recognizing me. Great. So the rumors had definitely spread. Relax, Evelyn murmured beside me. Nobody here dislikes you. That is not reassuring. She almost smiled again. We stopped outside a smaller sitting room near the east wing. Through the partially open door I saw Damien sitting beside the fireplace with a cup of untouched coffee in one hand. Morning exhaustion softened him slightly. The sharp edges remained, but now they looked human instead of untouchable. He glanced up the second I entered, and somehow the entire room shifted again. Attention. Focus. That same unsettling intensity from the night before. Clara, he said quietly. My name sounded warm in his voice this time. Dangerous thought. I pushed it away immediately. Good morning, I answered carefully. Then I noticed the little boy sitting on the couch beside him wrapped in a navy blanket. Pale skin. Dark hair. Green eyes almost identical to his father's. Leon Moretti looked fragile in a way children should never look. But he was watching me curiously now instead of struggling to breathe. Damien set his coffee down slowly without breaking eye contact. My son would like to thank the woman who saved his life. For a second I forgot how to breathe. Nobody had ever introduced me like that before. Not as the maid. Not as staff. Not as someone passing through the background carrying cleaning supplies. Damien Moretti had just looked directly at me and called me the woman who saved his son's life. The weight of those words settled heavily in the room. Leon sat quietly beneath the navy blanket watching me with careful green eyes that looked far too observant for an 8-year-old. Up close he looked even smaller than I expected. Pale from exhaustion. Thin shoulders. Dark circles beneath his eyes that no child should carry. But he was breathing normally now. Steady. Calm. Alive. Hi, I said softly, stepping closer to the couch. Leon studied me for another second before speaking quietly. You are the maid. Heat rushed into my face immediately. Children were honest in ways adults stopped being years ago. Yes, I admitted with a small smile. I am. Leon tilted his head slightly. You do not sound like a maid. Damien's mouth twitched faintly beside him like he was trying not to react. I blinked once. What does a maid sound like? Leon thought about that seriously. Tired. The answer startled a laugh out of me before I could stop it. A real laugh this time. Small. Soft. But genuine enough that both father and son looked surprised hearing it. That is fair, I admitted quietly. Leon stared at me another moment before lowering his voice. Dad yelled at everyone last night. Damien sighed beside him. Leon. You did. The little boy insisted calmly. Dr. Klein almost dropped his tablet. Another laugh escaped me accidentally. This time Damien actually smiled. Briefly. Barely there. But enough to completely change his face for half a second. Dangerous men should not smile softly. Confused people. Especially women who had spent their whole lives avoiding men powerful enough to ruin them without effort. How are you feeling? I asked Leon gently. He shrugged beneath the blanket. Better. Then after a pause, I heard your voice before I fell asleep. My chest tightened unexpectedly. You did. He nodded once. Everybody else sounded scared. His small fingers tightened slightly around the edge of the blanket. You did not. The room went quiet after that. Not awkward. Just emotionally honest in a way wealthy rooms usually avoided. I glanced toward Damien and found him already watching me again with that same impossible focus. Like every sentence I spoke confirmed something he had not fully understood before. A servant entered quietly carrying fresh coffee and breakfast trays. The woman nearly froze when she saw me sitting beside Leon instead of standing near the doorway where staff usually belonged. Her eyes widened briefly before she recovered and placed everything down carefully. I recognized that look immediately. Shock? Curiosity. Rumors spreading through the mansion faster than anyone admitted aloud. Damien noticed it too. His expression cooled instantly. Clara will be joining us for breakfast, he said calmly. The servant nodded quickly and left without another word. My stomach twisted. That is not necessary. It is, Damien replied simply. You have not eaten. I can eat downstairs with everyone else. You are not downstairs. The words landed strangely between us. Not flirtation. Not control exactly. More like certainty. Like Damien Moretti had already decided something about me internally and now the rest of the world needed to catch up. Leon reached for a piece of toast before speaking again. Dad never lets people stay up here. I looked toward Damien immediately. Leon. What? The boy asked innocently. It is true. He looked back at me seriously. Usually everybody leaves after they disappoint him. Silence settled over the room again. I stared down at the untouched coffee in front of me while something uncomfortable shifted inside my chest. Because despite the warmth of the fireplace and the softness in Leon's voice, one thing suddenly became very clear to me. Damien Moretti was not used to trusting people. And somehow, after one single night, he had decided not to let me disappear. Breakfast at the Moretti estate felt nothing like normal life. The coffee smelled richer. The silence carried weight. Even the sunlight pouring through the massive windows seemed expensive somehow, spilling across polished floors and gold-trimmed walls like the mansion itself refused to acknowledge ordinary people existed outside its gates. I sat carefully at the edge of the couch with a porcelain coffee cup between my hands while Leon picked apart a blueberry muffin beside me. Across the room, Damien stood near the fireplace speaking quietly into his phone in Italian. Low voice. Controlled tone. The kind of calm that made everyone around him instinctively nervous anyway. I tried not to watch him. Failed completely. There was something unsettling about the contrast he carried. One moment terrifying enough to silence a room full of specialists. The next moment adjusting his son's blanket without even looking down. You keep staring at him, Leon said casually. I nearly choked on my coffee. Damien glanced over immediately, one dark eyebrow lifting slightly while Leon looked entirely unbothered by the chaos he had just created. I was not staring, I said quickly. Leon shrugged. Everybody stares at him. Leon, Damien warned quietly while slipping his phone into his pocket. The little boy grinned faintly before taking another bite of muffin. I stared down into my coffee cup, wishing the floor would open beneath me. Heat burned across my cheeks so intensely I could practically feel Evelyn trying not to react from the doorway. Damien walked back toward us slowly, loosening the cuffs of his black dress shirt as he moved. No suit jacket this morning. No tie. Somehow that made him look more dangerous instead of less. Like the polished billionaire image had stripped away just enough to reveal the man underneath. The roads are clear now, he said calmly. A driver can take you home whenever you are ready. Relief and disappointment hit me at the exact same moment. Which was ridiculous. I should have wanted to leave immediately. This mansion was not my world. Men like Damien Moretti definitely were not my world. Thank you, I answered softly, for letting me stay. His green eyes settled on me again. You saved my son. The words still felt too heavy every time he said them. Before I could answer, another voice cut sharply across the room. Damien, we need to discuss the security reports. A tall man stepped into the sitting room carrying a tablet beneath one arm. Mid-40s maybe. Gray suit tailored perfectly. Cold blue eyes that landed on me immediately with open suspicion. Unlike Evelyn, this man did not bother hiding his dislike. This is private, he continued carefully while glancing toward me. Damien's expression cooled instantly. Then say it privately. The man hesitated. Perhaps the staff member should leave first. Staff member. Not Clara. Not the woman who saved Leon. Just staff again. I stood automatically before the tension could sharpen further. It is okay, I said quietly. I should probably go anyway. Sit down. Damien's voice was calm but absolute. Every muscle in the room seemed to tighten at once. Even the man holding the tablet looked caught off guard. I slowly lowered myself back onto the couch, pulse suddenly unsteady again. Damien turned toward the man without raising his voice once. Clara stays. The air changed immediately after that. Subtle. Dangerous. The same way skies changed before thunderstorms broke open. The man's jaw tightened slightly. You are trusting someone you barely know. Interesting, Damien replied calmly, considering she noticed what your specialists missed. Silence. Sharp and uncomfortable. Leon looked between the two men quietly while clutching his blanket closer. I hated this. Hated being the center of conflict in a house where power moved silently beneath every conversation. I really do not want problems, I admitted softly. Damien looked toward me immediately, his expression easing by half a degree. You are not the problem, Clara. Something about the certainty in his voice made my chest tighten unexpectedly, because nobody had ever defended me this quickly before. Not teachers. Not employers. Not anyone. The man in the gray suit finally exhaled slowly through his nose. Fine, he muttered. But this conversation concerns a threat against your family. My stomach dropped instantly. Leon stiffened beside me. Damien's face became unreadable again. Cold. Focused. Controlled. The terrifying version of him returning all at once. Then we definitely should not discuss it in front of my son, he said quietly. But before anyone could move, Leon reached for my sleeve suddenly. Small fingers wrapping tightly around the fabric. Can Clara stay with me? He asked softly. And for the second time since entering that mansion, the most powerful man in the room looked at me like my answer mattered more than everyone else's. The room stayed silent for 2 full seconds after Leon grabbed my sleeve. Not uncomfortable silence. Protective silence. The kind adults create when they realize a child has said something honest enough to shift the entire atmosphere. I looked down at Leon's small hand curled tightly against my sweater. His fingers trembled slightly beneath the blanket. Fear. Not panic exactly. Just the quiet fear children carried when they understood more than adults wanted them to. My chest tightened unexpectedly. You do not have to answer right away, Leon whispered softly, almost like he thought he was asking too much. That nearly broke me, because I recognized that tone immediately. The careful voice of someone used to people leaving. Damien's gaze moved from his son to me slowly. The dangerous coldness still lingered around him from the security conversation, but now something softer existed underneath it too. Trust maybe. Or hope. Both felt equally terrifying on a man like him. I can stay for a little while, I answered gently. Relief crossed Leon's face instantly. Small. Quick. But real enough that even the man in the gray suit noticed it. Damien noticed too. His shoulders eased by half an inch, almost invisible unless someone was watching closely. I was watching closely. Good, Leon murmured. Damien turned toward the man holding the tablet. Marcus, give us 10 minutes. Marcus clearly hated that decision. I saw it immediately in the tightness around his jaw. But he nodded once without arguing further and disappeared from the room. The second the door closed, Tension drained from the air slightly. Leon released my sleeve and leaned back against the couch cushions looking exhausted again. Everybody whispers when they think I am asleep, he admitted quietly. Damien's expression darkened. Leon. It is true. The little boy looked down at the blanket in his lap. I know something bad is happening. Children always knew. Adults just like pretending otherwise because it made them feel more in control. I glanced toward Damien carefully. The billionaire image people feared across the city seemed gone for a moment. Sitting beside his son now, he just looked like a father trying desperately not to fail someone he loved. Nothing bad is happening this morning, I said softly before Damien could answer. Leon looked at me uncertainly. How do you know? I smiled faintly. Because you are eating blueberry muffins instead of hospital food. Leon actually laughed at that. Quiet and tired, but enough to brighten the room instantly. Damien stared at me like he had never heard that sound before. Like joy itself had become unfamiliar inside this mansion. The realization hurt more than I expected. A few minutes later, Leon grew sleepy again. His breathing remained steady beneath the blanket while rain finally slowed outside the windows. The storm clouds over the river had begun breaking apart now, allowing thin sunlight to spill across the water in soft gold streaks. Peaceful. Fragile. Temporary. Damien carried Leon upstairs himself despite several staff members quietly offering help. He refused all of them without speaking more than 2 words. I stood alone near the fireplace afterward, suddenly aware that I had no idea where I belonged anymore. Not upstairs with the family. Not downstairs with the staff. Somewhere awkwardly in between. Damien returned 10 minutes later. Without Leon beside him, the room immediately felt colder. Larger somehow. More dangerous. He loosened his cuffs slowly while studying me with those impossible green eyes again. You are good with him, he said quietly. I looked down at my hands. I think he is just lonely. He does not usually trust people quickly. Neither do you, I almost said. But something stopped me. Damien walked closer until only a few feet separated us. Not threatening. Just near enough that I could smell cedarwood and coffee lingering faintly against his shirt. Most people around my son treat him carefully because they fear me, he admitted calmly. You treated him normally. The honesty in his voice caught me off guard. Powerful men rarely admitted loneliness out loud. Children do not need fear, I answered softly. They need consistency. Damien stared at me for a long moment after that. The fireplace crackled quietly between us while morning light filled the room in warm gold. Then he asked the question I had somehow been dreading since the night before. Clara, he said carefully, why does it feel like you are already planning to leave? My pulse stumbled instantly. Because the truth was simple. Men like Damien Moretti did not look at women like me forever. But something in his eyes told me he had already decided that was not going to be his choice.